had 5 different marketing channels, and Alex, one of the biggest things that he told me was like when he grew Gym Launch, they literally did not get a second marketing channel until they were doing more than 1 million a month. We're not even close to that. So I'm like, okay, it makes sense. Like you want to be all focused in one business, one marketing channel, serving one avatar. And I
Yeah.
think I think that's probably the biggest. It's just I see too, like if you take a look at standard wholesale companies in our business, what do? They wholesale, they fix and flip, they burr, they do innovations, they do everything. And then if you take a look at their marketing, they do direct mail, they do PPC, they do cold call, they do SMS. And then you wonder why they're not able to grow. Well, it's because they're spread thin across multiple different exit strategies and marketing channels. So that's probably the biggest.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Rare Mind Podcast. Today I got a rare individual because he's doing something rare in real estate. His name is Oscar Quintana. Last year he did $1.8 million in revenue. We'll get into it, how he did it. He's doing something no one's doing or talking about right now. Oscar Quintana, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. How are you doing? Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much, man. This is great, and I love having people, that do different things, because real estate is such a big, broad subject. It's just always good to learn. So, how'd you get started in real estate, Oscar? Tell us.
Yeah, so let me take you a trip down memory lane. When I was a police officer in my earlier 20s, I used to drive around streets and be a bird dog for somebody who was already doing wholesale. Her name was Erica, and
Hmm.
I didn't really know much about the industry, but whenever I would come across an ugly house, I would just save the address and I would send it over to her. And then her and I, we had like we met up for coffee one time, and she kind of started breaking down what it is that she does, how she gets these properties in the contract, she sells them for a profit, etc. So once I left being a police officer, I was still very intrigued into real estate. Originally, the first thing that I did was I got into a fix and flip, and
Uh-huh.
but but while I was doing that and trying to figure real estate out, my first company, which was an impact windows and doors company, that was really where majority of my time was going. But I was still dabbling with real estate on the side as a very unfocused entrepreneur. So
Uh-huh.
eventually, long story short, my first business ends up going pretty much not bankrupt, but I went out of business. I ended up $250,000 in debt, and at
Uh-huh.
that time, I had to make a decision as far as to what it is that I wanted to pivot to and do moving forward, and that was wholesale. I decided
Mm.
to start wholesaling because I up to that point I hadn't been able to figure it out, but I knew that there's a lot of education out there, and I was like, well, let me try to figure this out.
Okay, amazing. That's great. It's incredible how you got your start. I didn't know that the police officers would be bird dogs. That that's
I mean,
so that's so
if you're
creative.
driving, I used to work in
Yeah.
Brownsville. So that I mean,
Uh-huh.
if you want to talk about where houses are torn down, Brownsville is a great area to go to.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. That's great. I think that's a really golden nugget there. Get police officer to be your bird dogs. Uh, cool. So tell me, okay, you said there was a lot of education out there. Obviously, there's a big, journey from like when you start to when you actually get your first deal. So like,
For sure.
what'd you do like to get there? Like, how'd you get through that trough, that path, to get to your first deal? What'd you learn and what'd you do?
One thing that I always liked about the real estate space was that there's a lot of people getting into education. Around this time, it was probably, we're talking about 2019, 2018, like, or 2020, around that time. And people were
Uh-huh.
coming out with courses. They were willing to share what they knew. I didn't have that in my windows and doors company. So that was always
Yeah.
something that I was attracted to in this industry. And at that time, you saw a lot of people coming out with podcasts. I think Brent Daniels, during that time, that's when he was first getting hot.
Mhm.
So podcasts along with meetups, free meetups in our area. That's literally all that I used to go after. I think every single month for an entire 13 months straight, there's an investor in our local market by the name of Raul Balouf. And I used to go to all of his meetups and just ask questions and be curious, all while I was running like my main company, but I was always interested in what the wholesale space was about. So I just got my hands on really anything, whether it was YouTube videos, books on real estate, or just people who were having meetups. And I try to be present every single time as consistently as possible.
Okay, amazing. Love it. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Always good when there is knowledge already available for you to learn and not have to go through those same mistakes. So tell us about your first deal. How'd your first deal come about and how'd you do it? What was it like?
Yeah. So I was taking money from my windows and doors company and investing that money into the wholesale space. I was very clueless, but at the
Mm,
time I was trying PPC because I didn't want to, I couldn't invest the time into cold calling or anything like that. So I went into PPC. And at the time we were very scattered. Like I think we were doing PPC nationwide, and I remember doing a deal in a different state or whatnot. But
yeah.
one of our very first leads was a mobile home in Polk County, so Central Florida. I
Hmm.
remember I spoke to this individual. His name was Angel, and I forget. And we pretty much had agreed on a price. So what I did was I drove up there on a Saturday. We purchased the mobile home, and that same day I had already scheduled a whole bunch of buyers to go to the property for me to sell it. Right. That eventually ended up turning
Wow.
it into my first deal. I think we acquired it for like $4,000, and we probably sold it for like $8,000 $9,000.
Nice, nice. That's awesome. That's great. And I wanna touch back a little bit on something that you said. You got into $250,000 worth of debt. How'd you
Yep.
get into that debt? Like, how'd you get so big in the hole?
Man, that's a great question. That's a long list of reasons why you end up in a situation like that. But really, one of the biggest was that I just lacked focus. So I had my windows and doors company that was doing very well. Our first 7 months in business, we had already hit $1 million, and our first full year in business, we had done about $3 million in revenue. But I didn't understand the difference between gross margin, net margin, and meanwhile, while that was doing good, and I should have focused all my attention on that, I was also fixing and flipping houses. I was taking the money,
Mm,
the little money that I was making in that business because the margins were slim. I was taking that
yeah.
money and investing it into wholesale. So I was just very distracted. It's like I said, you don't end up in that situation without multiple reasons. But I'm glad that I made
Yeah.
those mistakes early on because those mistakes right now are like the foundation to how I'm running the company this time around.
Okay, amazing, amazing. Okay, so tell us a little about what you got going on right now. Tell us about this niche that you've carved out for yourself. Um,
Yeah, so
what's it called?
like I mentioned, we started off wholesaling, very industry standard. And I learned a ton about wholesaling because very early on I had a coach. You've met him, you've interviewed him. His name is William Dennis, Willie Numbers, and his 7 years
Hmm.
of knowledge in this space, he was able to transfer majority of that, if not all of that, to me. Can you hear me? It's saying reconnecting. Okay, can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you, but it was cutting out for a little bit.
Yeah, because it showed me reconnecting on mine. Are we good?
Yeah, go ahead, continue.
Okay, so I was saying Will's 7 years of knowledge in the space, he was able to transfer it to me. We literally were working together for an entire 14-month period. So I learned a lot about the wholesale space just through him alone. And then from there, I ended up going to Vegas about 8 months ago. I invested the most amount of money that I'd ever spent, in a single hour, which was 50 grand. I was able to speak to Alex and Alex and his team, Alex Hormozi. They broke down my entire business. And Alex gave me the simplest form of advice that is the reason why we're doing some of the things that we're doing today. He simply took a look at all of my different marketing channels, and he was like, "Why aren't you doing more of the most profitable marketing channel you have, which is driving for dollars?" But what that really meant is when I got back, it took me like 2 days for it to really dawn in, and I just ended up asking myself, I'm like, why are we having success in this marketing channel? And the reason being is that we had already stacked skills of number one, private investigation, and number two, understanding legal, right? And that's why that marketing channel was so profitable. So from that moment moving forward, after I had that conversation with Alex, we decided to only focus on the kind of deals where there's either a probate or a partition needed, and we kind of eliminated anything else that isn't that. And that's as I start learning more about what it is that we do and start getting deeper into it, and what are some of the things that are good and some of the things that are not so good, because there's always hairy in every business. I ended up realizing, I'm like, we're not in the wholesale space. Sure, we wholesale. That's how we exit out of these assets, but we're in the asset recovery space. So I
Mm,
don't view it as a wholesale company. I view it as an asset recovery firm.
okay. Okay, that's cool. Okay, so tell us a little bit about you mentioned two things that are key in here. You said private investigation
Hmm.
and um, legal, right? So give us a little bit of a breakdown or information about what private investigation is in the you know in the terms that you do, you know?
Right. So first we find the house because the house is that's how that's our vehicle to making money, right? Once we find the house, we understand legal, right? I'm not an attorney,
Mm,
but I've invested enough money into an attorney to understand the legalities of probates, partitions. So we understand legal, and we know that when somebody passes away, we understand the line of succession and who inherits what, right? So with
mm-hmm,
us understanding that and us going after the property, then at that point we just need to locate that individual,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's where the private investigation comes in because a lot of the times, you and I can go back and forth about our families all day long, and we'll come to the realization that our families are scattered. Some of them are in different states, different countries. So it's locating that individual that we know legally they're entitled to a portion of it, right? And then that's how we're
Yep.
able to ultimately make a transaction happen from the property which they would be entitled to.
Okay, amazing. Amazing. So, um, it, it sounds like you contact owners that don't even know that they own a piece of a property. And what I want to talk about is how do you actually get to contact them? Like, what are some of the tools that you use in order to get in contact with them? You know, how far and how above and beyond have you gone to contact a seller? You know, to get them to actually make a deal work. You know.
Yeah. So ideally, in our space, the biggest transactions come from people who are in the most need, right? So if you reach out to an heir that owns 100% of a property in Cuba, it's just you and that heir. There is no competition. So you're
Mm,
able to dictate price, everything. I mean, you dictate everything because that individual otherwise would not have been able to know that he was entitled to a house. So we've gone as far as
mm,
to get in contact with heirs that are in different countries. We have a couple cases going on right now in Cuba, one in Jamaica, if I'm not mistaken, in a couple different countries. So we locate these heirs because private investigation gets broken down into multiple parts. So you can do private investigation of locating somebody, or you can do private
mm,
investigation of simply asking questions and getting information out of an individual, right? So
mm.
it's two ways. What happens is a family member typically passes away. I get in contact with an individual who's staying at the house, right? And that individual, I start gathering information through questions that I'm asking.
Can you hear me?
Yep, yeah, just said reconnecting again, so that's why I paused.
Okay. Yeah. Damn, you contact other people in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the coolest things about what we do. Like when we reach out to these people, you can quickly tell like the sales process that we have is, I mean, it's not a standard wholesale company sales process. Like if you were to listen to our sales calls and a wholesale company, you'd realize why there's such a difference. We don't even talk about
Mm,
real estate majority of the time. A standard wholesale call is asking about the house, the conditions. We're reaching out to people that have no idea. So why are we going to get into what are the conditions of the house and all these things? We assume all that, right, when we make
mm.
our offer to the customer, but we're really just talking about number one, we're educating them on what they're entitled to, what are the next couple steps that takes, the costs associated, and ultimately how we can help them out.
Okay. Amazing, amazing. Okay, and so how do you get in contact with a person? Like, yeah, there's special websites. Do you need a license, you know, to get like some extra level, top level security, or you know, what what do you do for that?
You got to be able to gather information from multiple sites. So we look at things like obituaries. That's a great source. We take a look
Mm,
at county sites to see if there's prior open probate cases, eviction cases, any kind of cases that have been filed with the county. That's a great source of information. We contact neighbors. We contact people that are staying at the house, potential relatives, right? So we gather information that way. And then ultimately we use IDI. IDI is a great platform to skip trace, like to do single skip traces, and that's how we're able to locate a lot of these family members.
it's amazing. Okay, Great. So we have that private investigation part kind of handled a little bit. Now, tell us a little bit about the legal part, that you said that you've gotten so much experience and information on, that is valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the biggest pros of working with Will for the 14-month period that I did was he connected me with his attorney, who he worked with for the prior 5 years. And his attorney, in my opinion, Giovanni Borges, is probably the best probate attorney. I have yet to meet a better probate attorney and litigation attorney in South Florida. So what do? I run the same playbook that I did with Will. I just invest money into him, and I try to get as many one-on-ones calls as I can, so that I can understand like his 7 years of knowledge or however long he's been doing it now. How can I get some of that knowledge and use that
Mhm.
to our benefit? So, yeah, Gio is a person who handles all of our probates, all of our partitions, and what was your question again?
Tell us about the legal side of things, like,
Yeah,
you know,
right. So a lot of the time when we're reaching out to these heirs, they're not entitled. They're not aware of how they can even make money off of something that they're entitled to. So we explain to them that there's different components, right? Depending on the deal, sometimes there's just a probate. So probate is how you transfer ownership from somebody who's passed away over to an heir. And at other
Mhm.
times, there's a probate and a partition. So partition is a way that you can legally go through the court process and force the sale of the house so that an individual could get paid. And we tell customers, we're like, this is very common in a situation where there's multiple owners. It's very difficult to get everybody on the same page. Everybody has a different
Mhm.
life. Everybody has different needs, right? So that's why partitions they're so common, in my opinion.
It's amazing. And yeah, so tell me a little bit about the partitions, how much does it cost to get a partition and how likely is it to go through,
Mhm.
whenever you file a partition?
Yeah, so partitions they'll cost depending on the attorney, they'll cost you between like I would say roughly around $5,000. What I like about partitions is if you have the right heirs, that's the caveat. You got to make sure you have the right heirs because people come out of the woodworks and they present wills and that throws everything off. But if you have the right heirs, a partition is 100% guaranteed of going through. There's really three outcomes that you get out of a partition. The first outcome, in my opinion, is probably the best outcome, the fastest. It's where you're partitioning another party, and that individual just has money. They're emotionally attached to the property, and they can just buy you out, right, at an agreed price.
Hmm.
That barely happens. That's probably happened to us once that I can think of. Option two is a little bit more common. You partition the party, and they don't have money to hire an attorney, and they come to the realization of, hey, I do need to sell this house. It's in distress. So they end up getting on board and ultimately selling the property or their portion of the property over to us. I love those because if on the front end you're under contract for 50% of the house and you're already going to be making a minimum of 50 grand, if you're able to get the second party involved, you just go from making 50 to making 100. I love those kind of deals, right? But
Yeah.
realistically, the most common is option three. The individual doesn't have the money to buy you out. They also don't want to sell the property because they're staying in it and they're benefiting 100% of it, right? And so you have to go through the court process of forcing the sale of the house. The property ends up getting listed by a realtor. And when the house sells to the highest bidder on the open market, then it gets distributed to all the owners.
Okay, great. Okay, so I understand. And so tell me how you make money. All right. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you lock up a percentage of the property, like, and what is the seller conversation like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's very simple. We take a look at what is the house worth as is, right? We always have to expect the worst because majority of the customers that we work with, they have no idea about the house or the conditions or any of that stuff. So we don't discuss any of that, right? But we just
Hmm.
discuss like mortgages and liens and stuff like that. But those are some of the bigger things. We take a look at what the house is worth as is. So let's say a house is worth 200 grand as is, um, and there's four heirs, right? Well, four heirs, that means that each heir's technically their portion is 50 grand, right? And then we
Hmm.
try to get in at a number that makes sense for us. So in this case, that deal probably wouldn't be for us because 50 grand is a minimum of what we try to see on every single deal. And if there's only
Hmm.
50 grand, if that individual's portion is only worth 50 grand, then there's not enough for us to be able to make them an offer where they can walk away with some money.
Hmm.
You get what I mean? But that's what we
Yeah.
look for. We look for the percentage of their as is, and then if whatever the number may be, we make sure that we're making the amount that we need to make as a company for the service that we're going to provide.
Perfect. So you want to make at least 50 grand, right?
Minimum,
for each deal. And
correct,
so
minimum.
tell us like how much is your average profit per deal, and how long does it take for it to be realized?
Hmm. So we pivoted strongly into our business model 8 months ago. So we're literally like speed is the one major component that we're working on. But right now our average deal size is in the mid 60s. And I would say that right now our deals are taking a little long to close. So let's just go with half a year, 6 months, honestly. We're trying to decrease the time that the probates and the partitions take because there is a lot of time that just gets killed by documents not getting filed on time or whatnot. But that's something that we're working on as a company. But I would say right now about 6 months.
Okay, cool. And tell us a little bit about like how long it takes from when the lead goes into your CRM
Mhm.
and to when you actually get a deal. Like something inked on paper that says that you have now started the under contract process of
Yeah.
this
So
deal.
realistically, if you're getting if a lead comes into the system and we're making contact right away, we're making them aware of a property that they're entitled to. As long as they're okay with all the legal processes of understanding, hey, probate's gonna have to happen, a partition's gonna have to happen, and there's some kind of eviction is gonna have to go on. If they're okay with all those steps, we could have them on the contract within 1 or 2 weeks. This happened before, right?
Mm,
But a lot of these cases, the customer needs to be okay with what comes with a partition. Sometimes there's another family member staying at the house, so
mm.
they're like, hey, I don't want to ruffle feathers. That's my sister. That's my this. That's my that. We make it very aware during our sales process. This is gonna ruffle feathers. Are you okay with that? If they're not, we stop our sales process right there. They have to. That's something that they have to be okay with in order for them to get the outcome that they want, which is ultimately to make money.
Okay, gotcha. So tell us okay, tell us what a typical conversation goes like, with the seller that you just got, a new
Hmm.
lead from.
Okay, so a lead comes into the system. I reach out. Right now, I'm still the lead manager. I still have that hat in our company. I reach out. I
Mm,
make first point of contact. I'm number one. I'm mentioning the deceased owner, right? I'm making sure that they're connected to that individual, and then I'm simply asking them, are you aware of the house that individual left behind that would be an inheritance to multiple family members? Sometimes they're
mm,
aware, majority of the times they're not aware, right? If they're aware, cool. I just ask them if they've had any trouble figuring out the property or how to claim their portion of the inheritance. That I don't ask them if they're interested in selling it. Notice
right.
that the question is different, right?
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes their answer is no. That's fine. If they're not aware, then I simply make them aware. I'm like, hey, well, this is the property. Write this down. We specialize in inheritance recovery, so we help heirs, family members just like yourself, get paid for their portion of a house. This is our information. Remember, the first thing a seller is thinking is this is a scam. So
Yeah.
you don't want to pre-sell on the first call if they're unaware, number one, and you don't want to vomit all over them. So you want to give them just the necessary amount of information for them to go ahead and do their homework, look up the property, confirm everything that you told them, right? And then you want to give them your company information. So they'll be able to check out our testimonials, our Google reviews online, and that right there will give us more credibility going into call two. On call two, now we have their interest, right? Now they've looked into us. They're aware these people are legit. What they're talking, I mean, they have the facts. Before we get on calls, we make sure we have the facts. We're not trying to go into calls unprepared. So on calls number two, we explain to them what that process looks like. We let them know, hey, based off of our understanding, you're entitled to this percentage. We confirm the family tree just to make sure that they are entitled to that percentage on the call. And then from there, we explain to them, well, this is what's needed in order for you to get paid. A probate might be needed, a partition might be needed. This is the time that it looks like. And then once you're okay with all that, then that's when we start getting into the numbers.
Okay. Okay, so now you mentioned, an example, right before. You were like, okay, let's say the house is 200,000, but that wouldn't work, right? Let's say the house is worth 400,000, right?
Yeah.
And so each heir is, there's four heirs, so each heir has 100,000. You're
Hmm.
wanting to get one piece of it, that heir, essentially for 50,000. Is that right?
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Okay, so that's the way the deal processes. That's the way it
Hmm.
works. All right, and so very a lot of people are familiar with wholesale contracts. The purchase agreement and all that stuff. Is the process to get the property under contract or the piece, with the seller, with the heir, similar to the way a wholesale contract would go?
Standard, yes. Our sales process, literally the final step once we've already come to an agreement on the price, is we walk the seller through the contract on the phone with them. So we take
Yeah,
however much time that needs. We walk through every single step. We have an SOP that I literally open up every single time when I'm walking a seller through a contract. And the reason why we do that is because this process takes long. So we want to make sure that if for whatever reason they ever go back to the contract, they understand the service that we had agreed to from the very beginning. But as soon as we
yeah.
get the contract, what kind of separates us is very similar to what Will does with a reverse flip is we're getting a deed within 24 to 48 hours. The reason why we do that is because we want to be in control from the very beginning. Once a probate gets submitted into the court, now it's public records, and then that's when a whole bunch of wholesale companies start reaching out to the seller. So we want to make sure that we're in control from the very, very beginning.
Wow. Okay, that's super interesting. So, okay, so as soon as you get something recorded, like a probate, then every single wholesaler is going to start flooding it, right? And
That's
you
yeah.
and you've already got the deed at that point, so you're secured, right? So you're not worried about like, hey, someone's going to offer them more than what I offered them already because you already have them.
I
Pretty
I
cool.
don't I don't worry in the sense of I just know that what we do is different. Like I don't know a lot of companies that are buying 25, 30, 50% of a property. So I'm not too worried on that end, but it's public
Mhm.
records. So although actually majority of wholesalers don't even know how to find that information, some do, right? And some try to get in contact directly with the seller.
Okay. Okay, that's amazing. Okay, super cool. All right. And I don't believe you mentioned what was the cost of a probate. You know, what is the cost? You mentioned this is part of the 6 month timeline that you have for deals. Is that
Uh,
correct?
I'm sorry, you broke up there. You said what was the current cost for probates?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think you mentioned the cost of probate, which is built into the timeline of your 6 month deal, to close
Mhm.
timeline.
Yeah, so a probate is going to run you between depending on whether it's a summary administration or a formal. It could cost you between 2,500 and 3,500. It really depends on the relation with the attorney, how much volume you give them, etc. But we have a really good relationship with our attorney. I love working with
Awesome. Can you mention the difference between the two types of probates you just mentioned? I think there's some nuance there.
him. Yeah, so you really have. Okay, can you hear me? You broke up a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. So you really have, yeah, you have four kind of probates. I'll break down the four. So you have a summary administration. That's whenever somebody's been passed away for more than 2 years. A formal, the only difference is that it's not past the 2 years, is within the 2 years. So if somebody passed away within the past 2 years, that would be a formal administration. And then you have an ancillary formal and an ancillary summary. The ancillary portion is just whenever somebody passes away and that's out of the state. So if somebody passed away out of the state within the past 2 years, that'll be an ancillary formal administration. And if somebody passed away outside of the state after 2 years, then that'll just be an ancillary form summary administration.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, great. So, okay, so tell us. Okay, you mentioned that you talked to Hormozi, and he said like, why aren't you spending most of your time in the marketing channel that is giving you the most profit, right? So, can you tell us what driving for dollars, like what it is that you guys do, and I guess the the checklist that you go through to see how if it's a deal or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have certain qualifiers. We have drivers that literally have qualifiers next to their screen as they're driving every single street. We use batch leads. It's like $99 a month, but really the marketing channel that we're in is cold call. But the way that we pick the leads to cold call is through driving for dollars. So we'll go through streets. We'll gather exactly what target property is it that best fits us, and then our drivers, they're doing preliminary background investigation. So they're gathering intels as far as who passed away, when did they pass away, what are potential family members. Is there people staying at the house with maybe different last names, telling us that might be a squatter, right? They're looking for obituaries, court cases, any information that they can gather, so that once the lead comes into the system, as the lead manager, I'm able to understand. Okay, this is what's going on here, and then we take it from there. But I mean that conversation with Alex was the most amount of money I'd ever invested in an hour span. It was 50 grand. Um, but it was, man, it was so valuable. So
That's
bad. I
amazing,
mean,
man.
what he gave me that day literally changed the entire course of our business, number one. And he gave me so much that I literally don't need another piece of advice from him for a while. I'll put it like that. It's just gonna take me time to execute, like where and which the direction that he kind of pointed me in.
Okay, amazing. So tell us a little bit about how your operation is right now. So how many people you have working for you, and what are the different kind of positions you have, and how do you plan to expand that, to be able to bring in more revenue?
Mhm. So we have a team of six. Right now, we currently have an outbound lead specialist. That's the person who does the driving and all the preliminary background investigation. We have a follow-up specialist. They're in charge of about 80% of the leads that are in their system. So they're keeping tabs with everybody, checking pulses to make sure that once they're ready to sell, we're there. Right
Hmm.
now, I sit in the closer seat. That's really my main. That's where majority of my time goes within the day. And then on the back end, we have an executive assistant that works with me, a transaction
Hmm.
coordinator, and then we have a regional asset manager, which is our dispo.
Okay, nice, nice. And how is it like hiring a team? Like how easy or how
I'm sorry,
difficult is it?
You
What's
broke up there. What do you say?
I said, so how is it hiring a team? How easy or how difficult is it, to put on your hiring hat and, your manager hat and all that and hire a team? Like what kind of process you have to go through, or what kind of, KPIs, you follow so that you have, team members that are performing at the level that you want.
So that depends on the role, but I would say hiring is a lot more difficult the newer the company is, because just by percentages, majority of companies fail within the first 5 years. But you got to make sure that as an entrepreneur, you're mission driven, right? And that there's runway for what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Because if somebody can't see themselves coming into your business and having runway for themselves, they're just not going to join us. It's not a good enough opportunity.
Hmm.
You get me? So, but our process is very simple. It's the same that we do on the front end to get customers. We literally just rinse and repeat and do that on the back end. We make posts, right? We do outreaches. People then respond to our outreach posts. From there, we simply take them on to step two. We ask for a couple of requirements from them, typically a resume, a video, especially if they're VAs. We want to see the way that we want to hear the way that they sound and they look. And it's resume and their computer station, which that's very, very huge whenever you're hiring virtual assistants. Because I mean, for me personally, I invest a lot into myself. So if you take a look at my workstation, it's you could tell like, okay, this individual has invested into their computers or whatnot. So that tells you a lot about an individual. If they're working off of a little laptop, and you can tell that the laptop is 50 years old. So we ask for those three things. From there, we vet them. And if we feel like this would be a good match to even have a conversation, we'll go ahead and we'll interview them. So that's kind of like the funnel. From the interview, we'll make an offer. If they accept the offer, then we transition over to onboarding.
Perfect. Okay, gotcha. And how are you looking to expand? Um, you, you said you did 1.8 million last year. What kind of target are you trying to hit this year?
So our goal this year is 5 million. I don't when we set goals, we really I made a small tweak on that, and we really our goals are inputs. So for example, like our goal actually this year is to make 166 offers, because we know that if on the sales side we make 166 offers based off of an average deal size of 75 grand, we'll hit the 5 million mark, right? So
Hmm.
I don't like making it a revenue goal, even though that's cool, and I do bring that up. I like to make it
Yeah.
about the inputs. What do we need to put in order for us to get the outcome that we want? So our goal this year is
Hmm.
166 offers.
Okay, that's amazing. Yeah, I love that. That's a different way to take a look at things. And okay, and so just from that perspective, like, what are you looking to do in your business? Like, are you looking to, replace yourself, get someone to close, or are you looking to hire just more, lead man, like, I guess, people who do driver for dollars? Like, what's the next step to like, expand this business?
I see a huge runway for what it is that we do, and the reason being is, like I mentioned to you earlier, a lot of the customers that we're getting on the phone with, they're unaware. You can tell like there's not a service in the industry that's reaching out to these people the way we are and able to service them the way we could. So I see a huge runway. I can throw out some numbers just for the hell of it, but to be honest, I don't see a cap on what we do. And the way that I want to grow that is literally I want to get our basic unit economics right for Dade County. And once we have that hitting on all cylinders, and I have a pretty good feel on what that looks like, and we simply just move on county to county. Every single county is going to have its challenges, but we need to get Dade County just 100% flowing perfectly from the acquisition side to the dispo side to the transaction portion with our attorney. We want every single side running smoothly, and then just all you literally do at that point is you start adding different people to the departments, and that's
Okay,
how we see ourselves scaling.
I gotcha. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. So you're in Miami-Dade County, right? You're in Miramar, Florida. Miami-Dade County is one of the hottest markets in the United States, and
Yeah.
you're doing, $75,000 average, profit from, just revenue from your deals.
Okay.
Um, so you mentioned this happens all over the country, right? Um,
Yeah.
and you haven't yet seen anybody else do what you're doing, right? Or
I've seen bits and pieces. I've been studying a lot of asset recovery firms, and seeing the way that their business model works, but there's none that comes from the wholesale space that eventually went into asset recovery. So I don't know anybody personally that's doing something super similar to what it is that we do. I'm sure there's somebody out there that is, but not at a super big scale for me to be able to be like, okay, like we're literally copying exactly what they're doing.
yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Uh, and again, you're saying that the people that you talk to, the sellers, these sellers they're unaware. So like, are you the first person that they talk to about this, or have they gone a call before?
A lot of times, yeah. The more difficult somebody is to find, the better it is for us. That's a great indicator for me that okay, once we do make contact with this person, they literally have no idea because we know all the work that it took for us to locate them. So like we know that there's
Hmm.
not another company willing to invest that kind of the money and the time that goes into locating some of these heirs. We have a couple cases right now going on in different countries, Cuba, some in Jamaica, we have another one in I think it's Thailand of just heirs. I mean, they literally have no idea. Nobody's reached out to them. They legally don't know that they're entitled to a portion of a house. So we want to lean more into that. And the way that we do that is like I mentioned earlier, we do that through this private investigation and understanding legal very well.
Yeah, great. So I understand a little bit about what you're doing, and I know you mentioned one thing that was very important is the docket. Can you please tell us what the docket is, how that comes into your business,
Mhm.
and how that makes you different from all the other wholesalers or real estate investors that may have no idea about what this is or even know how to use it?
Yes. So we have a deep prospecting checklist, and one of the steps on that deep prospecting checklist is to always go check the docket. Whenever somebody gets a divorce, has an eviction, there's a probate that they're a part of, any kind of court case that goes onto the docket. So a lot of times we're able to gather information just from simply reading the documents. A lot of people don't even know that they're there, but there's a way that you can locate them, and you can simply just read them, understand legal terms, and use that to your benefit. So there'll be times where we can't find a number for an individual, but we notice that they evicted somebody 10 years ago, and we try giving that number a call, and that number works. But we figured that out through the docket. We weren't able to skip trace that individual. We tried multiple skip tracing platforms, and we weren't able to locate them.
Right.
But I mean, yeah,
Okay.
that's something Will taught me, by the way. I wanted to bring that up
Yeah.
because I was like, I remember when he first kind of showed me the docket and he started going through some of the documents. I was like, no wonder. Up to the point that I started working with Will, I couldn't see five figures on a deal. Everything that I had made was below 10 grand up to that point.
Okay. Yeah. That's yeah, that's true. That is yeah. So most wholesalers they have an average assignment fee of like 10 or $15,000, and you're obviously hitting 50, $75,000 in Miami-Dade County, which is crazy. So yeah, that's incredible. Now, in the docket, there's different kinds of language, right? Because that's written by attorneys or whatever. So what's the
Mhm.
best way to learn how to use like to read that doc in a way that actually makes sense to you?
That's a good question. So in all of our departments, whether it's the disposition department, the follow specialist, or the person who's gathering the leads for us, one of our actually no, not one of ours, our first day of training is literally legal terms. So we have a
Mm,
set of legal terms that we just use in our industry and that we use with customers to, to be able to understand what's going on. So we literally go through all that. The second half of the day is literally we quiz them. We give them the legal terms. We tell them to go through it. We don't expect for them to remember all of them, but we're going to quiz them on the legal terms in the afternoon. And after we quiz them, then I start going through all the legal terms and I start giving stories. And
mm.
I start giving stories, analogies, or whatnot for them to understand how we use this in our business. So I would say that that's a start. But you can do it that way, or you can do it the other way that I did it, of simply just hiring an attorney and spend money on them. Invest one, two, a couple hours into them so you can understand all the knowledge that they have.
I gotcha. So can you give us a little bit of a little master class on some legal terms that would help someone kind of understand a little bit more about what's going on if they were to go see the docket in a property?
For sure. So, one of the biggest ones is like an affidavit of heirs. A lot of people don't know, but on a probate case, the affidavit of heirs is the document that kind of breaks down the family tree to you. Sometimes family members don't fill it in all the way, or they don't put in all the information. But on the affidavit of heirs, if they do it the right way, you'll see who the parents are that passed away, the if there's any spouses, the kids, the grandkids, etc. And then a huge little nugget here is on the last page of the affidavit of heirs, you have the person who filled out the document, which is typically the petitioner, the person who's going through the probate process, their phone number and their emails on there. So there's no need to skip trace them. We know they filled out that piece of document, and that's the most accurate number for that individual.
Yeah.
So that's a nugget for you right there.
Okay, that's super cool. Great. And based on some things that I learned from you, you mentioned that there was six different kinds of deeds. And obviously one of the parts in your process you said is you get the deed, within 24 to 48 hours after signing
Yeah.
paperwork with the owner, with the hair. So can you tell us a little bit about the different kind of deeds that you use and which one best fits for your kind of transaction
Mhm.
or case?
Yeah. So all of the deeds that we get are quitclaim deeds. But there's a total of six different kind of deeds that you have to understand the difference because they do have a difference. But the quitclaim deed is the one that we use on our side of the business. So every single time we get a property in the contract, within the first 24 48 hours, what we're getting is a quitclaim deed. But for example, let's say that you're reading, let's say you're reading let me throw out another one at you, a life estate deed, right? You're looking at a life estate deed, and the life estate deed pretty much says that, hey, Julian, he can stay at this property for the rest of his life, but God forbid something happens to him, the property goes to his remainderment, right? And let's say he has three or four remaindermen, and we recognize that Julian passed away. Well, in that case, now there's really four owners to that property.
Mm,
And those four owners, if you have a multiple ownership situation, those are the kind of customers that we want to help out because it only takes one out of those four to want to sell in order for us to do a transaction with them. So understanding
that
the
makes sense.
different, yeah, understanding the different deeds, which is back to education. That's what my attorney taught me. Breaking down every single
Mm,
one of these, understanding the legal terms, what's a tenant in common, what's a joint tenant with right of survivorship. All those things they add up.
gotcha. Have you seen any success with using ChatGPT for legal terms to understand them and learn them?
For sure, for sure. ChatGPT. I'll actually give you a scenario. There was a property that we were going after that had an adverse possession, and we didn't know who the owner was because there was a dissolution of marriage, meaning that they got divorced like 20 years ago. So we went through all the court cases. I'm sorry, we went through all the court documents, and we found that there was an MSA. That's another key term, a marriage settlement agreement. And on the MSA, typically it tells you who is it that's entitled to the house. Is it the spouse? Is it the husband or whatnot? But this document was so old that I couldn't even read it. Like it was very hard for me to read. So what I did was I downloaded it, I sent it off to ChatGPT, we transcribed it, and then it ended up telling us, oh, the wife is like the one entitled to the property. It literally broke down the entire marriage settlement agreement, and all I did was read it at that point, and I'm like, okay, so the wife is the person who I need to be going after, in this case. I don't have to go after anybody on the husband side because they had both passed. So that's how that's ChatGPT helped me out in that end, and then that's ultimately how we ended up locating family members in Thailand.
Okay, wow, look at that. Okay, so
Yeah.
adverse possession. What does that mean? What's that key term?
So an adverse possession is not super common, believe it or not. There's only about one or two every single month in all of Dade County, and there's over 1 million properties. So just for some context there, but an adverse possession is pretty much when
Hmm.
somebody's been paying the property taxes for 7 years in a row. So for example, let's say you own a house, and God forbid, you passed away, and I'm your neighbor, and I've been paying your property taxes for 7 years in a row. An adverse possession is something that I can do in order for me to take possession of the property. So
I
it's
see.
not super common, but it happens between family members or squatters or people that are staying at the house after the individual passes away. That's another common key term.
Okay, got it. So you mentioned that the affidavit or heirship, that's basically the line of succession, right? That's
Yeah.
what you see, and that's how you know which heirs to go after, right?
Well, we do. So one thing that Will always taught me was you want to trust, but you always want to verify everything. So
Uh-huh.
if I'm on the phone with a seller and they tell me one thing, I'm probably going to verify that with another family member. So just because I see a document that's filled in by a family member, I don't automatically assume this is what it is. I try to get confirmation, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, the affidavit of heirship, if you fill it out the right way, that right there tells you the line of succession. Correct.
Got it. Got it. Okay. That makes sense. So very interesting. And so now, tell us a little bit about your profit margins. You did $1.8 million last
Mhm.
year. Like, what are your costs and how much are you netting?
Yeah, so last year we didn't net that much. If you add like owner discretion back, meaning like salaries and things that get ran through the company, like the vehicle and stuff like that, probably ended up doing about 500 grand, give or take. But the
Okay.
reason why the reason why the numbers are a little skewed is because really within my first 14 months in the wholesale space, not even in the asset recovery space, but in the wholesale space, 50% of my revenue I split with my coach, and that was probably the best investment that I've ever made up to this date, right? So
Hmm.
going into year two, I wasn't even focused on the disposition side of the business. We were just JVing. We didn't care to pay somebody 5, 10, whatever amount of money it took because I understood at the end of the day, acquiring the deals is a lot more difficult. So if we can get the front end right, the deal will sell itself. We know that a good deal will always sell itself. So yeah, the
Yeah.
margins are a little skewed because of that. We pay out a lot of
Okay.
JV fees.
Right. Okay. So the 1.8 is what you made in total, but let's
That was
say
Rev.
half of that
That was Rev.
that was Rev, right? And then half of that would go to Will, right? More or less.
Well, no, that I was working with Will a year prior to that. The year with him, we did 1.1. Last year, we did 1.8. So out of that 1.8, our gross was about 1 million, and then the net with owner discretions or whatnot, it was about half of that, so about 500 grand.
Okay, cool. And what? Okay, so like, what do you see yourself doing this year? So $5 million. Like, what profit margin are you projecting? And I guess just yeah, and then we
I
can
mean,
talk about taxes because
off of the 5 million, we're I'm trying to get to the point that our gross margin is at 80%. So if
oh
that
wow,
holds true, then we can net two, and then now we're able to start doing. Now we're really able to start investing up to this point. The reason why, if you take a look at my profit and loss statement or whatnot, they're not
hmm
super sexy, but that's because I've constantly reinvested into myself. Whether it
hmm
was 600 grand in Will in year one in the space, or I think last year I invested a little bit over 100 grand in education. I just it could look good. Yeah, it could look good that we make more money on paper, but I'm like, I rather just continue to reinvest into myself because ultimately I'm the vehicle that benefits the most out of this. You get me?
right, yeah.
But yeah, the,
You're
the goal
you're
this year is five.
you're investing into the S&P 500 instead of the S&P.
Exactly.
So yeah, okay, cool. And all right, so that I mean that's really good, man. I mean, and you're getting taxes, like you're getting taxed. Like, are you doing anything from like getting any taxes, depreciation, or buying any property, or like what's your strategy when you get this big huge amount of income coming in?
Yeah, no, man. I maybe it's a little ignorant on my part. I think that, if you make a lot of money, you're gonna have to pay taxes one way or another. Now, sure, you can try to find legal ways of getting those taxes down, but there's no way that they're gonna go away completely, right? Like people say that this thing about billionaires not having to pay taxes, but I literally just watched a clip from Elon the other day. I think he paid over like $1 billion to the IRS. So if the wealthiest person pays taxes, then what makes me think that at some point I will not be able to pay taxes? I focus a lot more on just bringing in more money. And maybe that's ignorant on my part, and maybe that'll change down the line. But I'm not too worried. Last year definitely had the biggest tax bill of the year, and that hurt because
Yeah.
you ultimately end up realizing, oh man, so I just worked how many months for free? But that's where we're at right now. I don't want to get distracted with keeping rentals, or let me just continue to bring in more, and at some point, I'll have really smart people when it comes to finances around me, and we'll worry about that when we worry about that.
I hear you. Yeah, I understand. That's super cool, man. Yeah, I know that taxes is like one of our biggest expenses is, real estate investors or, just professionals, in the space. So
Hmm.
yeah. And all right. So let's talk a little bit about, Miami-Dade County. You're doing these deals here. So what kind of property do you look for? When you're driving for dollars, like what are some key attributes of a house that may have potential for you?
Yeah. So somebody passed away,
Hmm.
or multiple people own the house. That needs to be on every single property that gets submitted as a lead into our system. And then besides that, we have like I mentioned a qualifiers list that we literally have to check off before our outbound lead specialist submits a lead. So, I mean, we literally have 15 different triggers. It could be anything from taxes that are behind. It could be from distress, and the way we qualify a distressed property is we have seven different distress triggers. So it needs to meet at least five out of the sevens for us to consider distress. But yeah, it's literally a long sheet that she needs to check off on before she submits a lead, because the last thing we want is for somebody to, get submitted. We spend time in a conversation with them, and ultimately we realize this just isn't the individual that we can best help out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about, you said obviously there's costs, right? For like going through this process, probate,
Hmm.
partitions, etc. So
Yeah.
when you're going through this, do you pay the seller, for their portion up front? Do you tell them, hey, if we get this done, we'll pay you at the end, at the back end? And also for your attorney, like you say, hey, do I pay you up front or do I pay you at the back end?
So as far as the sellers, we've done it before where we've paid sellers at the very beginning, but like I mentioned, this service takes so long currently that we literally burn through cash flow, and so we're already going and spending and investing money into an attorney or whatnot. So we tell the sellers they get paid out on the back end. It's free to them. So what did they have to lose? Number one, they weren't aware of it. Number two, they don't have to come out of pocket for it. To me, that sounds like a win-win. But as far as the attorney, it really depends on the attorney relationship that you had. We've had attorneys that we've had to try out where they're like, hey, you got to leave a retainer up front. We've had other attorneys that they're okay with getting paid on the back end, or some other ones where they just take half up front and then half on the back end. But it really just depends on your relationship with the attorney and how many deals you do with them.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and when you're talking to these sellers, like, could you share some situations, like, of like maybe a specific deal case that you maybe netted the most on? Kind of, I guess what was kind of like the particular situation you were going through, with the sellers
Yeah.
that had it so that you were able to make as much money as you did.
Yeah, we can talk about probably like our biggest deal in company history that we closed last year. I believe it was Q3 or Q4. It was for
Hmm.
266 grand. So I'll give you the backstory on that one. The individual's mom had passed away.
Hmm.
Um, it was extremely difficult to get in contact with this guy. He had no phone, no email. How do you get in contact with him? You literally have to go out of your way to go to the house, right? And what if he's not there? You wasted a drive. And I
Yeah.
don't like leaving my workspace for like anything. I just value my time. So what we did is we ended up skip tracing his address to see if the individual lived with anybody else. Maybe he was staying with a couple other roommates or whatnot. And yeah, we found out that he was. So we got in contact with one of the guys, and the guy was always working for some reason whenever I called. So I was like, man, I'm never going to be able to get in contact with the seller. But what I did was I woke up on a Saturday very early because my thought process was, if I call this person at 7 in the morning, there's no way he's going to tell me he's working. He needs to be at the house with this guy. So I reached out
Right.
to his roommate, and I was like, hey, I really got to get in contact with a relative or a family member of so and so, the deceased owner. And he was like, "Oh yeah, let me put this individual on." So they put the individual on. Um, the house was already behind on taxes a couple years. So if I'm not mistaken, I think there was even a tax auction that was set for the house. And I explained to him, I'm
Yeah.
like, "Hey, we specialize in inheritance recovery, so we literally help out homeowners in your exact situation." He was on board. I think within a couple hours, we were good to go. I passed by the property. We ended up getting the house in the contract, and we got all the documents signed like a day or two later. But yeah, that's one of our biggest deals, and that's a deal that we know for sure that standard wholesale companies, they just weren't going to be able to reach out to this individual. Like, we were on it,
Yeah.
and the only way we made contact is by getting in contact with somebody who was living with them, which was difficult.
Yeah. That's amazing. So okay, tell me a little bit about tell us about the what was I going to ask you? The question was okay, so you have all these sellers that you talk to, um is there any being like any kind of like I don't know, any dramatic Jerry Springer or kind of situation with sellers or like, you know, I guess because you get to know a lot about these people's situations and stuff. So it's
For sure.
yeah. So what was like? Has there been like some deals that like just really end up in like some terrible situation like I don't know like brothers or like how is that like working with sellers that like with brothers who potentially get their feather like how does some of these things end like and how do you
Yeah,
deal with that
it
because
reminds me.
you're in the middle of it you're like you're
Mhm.
dealing with both of them or all of them you're trying to work things out so how's that work.
Yeah, there's one story that comes to mind. So we were working with a seller that had inherited a property. He had inherited 50% of the house, and his sibling had inherited the other 50%, right? They one didn't want to sell, the other did. So we ended up doing a partition. But I remember the individual calls me and he's like, "Hey man, they're threatening me. I'm gonna have to call the cops." And I'm like,
What?
what's going on? Like, so you get an understanding of what's going on. They're like, yeah, you send them over because as soon as we get started with the partition, we need to send a formal letter to the parties to let them know like what's going on and if they want to hire an attorney or whatnot. So we did that, and the family it started causing a whole bunch of chaos. So I was like, okay, lesson learned. What we do now to answer your question is we just set that expectation up front. Like during our sales process, one of the biggest things that I mentioned very early on is, hey, you got to be okay with that this is going to ruffle feathers with the family members. Are you okay with that? If they tell me they don't want to ruffle feathers, I just put a hard stop to our sales process because I already know what that'll look like afterwards. We go through with the
Right.
process, and the second that the other family member gets news of this, they're going to be calling and causing all kind of chaos. And so I like to set that expectation up front.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah, and so can you tell us like if you have any kind of like negotiation tactics or anything like when you're trying to get the seller, to, you know, claim their inheritance at a discount? Like what's the kind
Hmm.
of, I guess little trick you if you would call it or kind of just,
Yeah.
what would you do, just to try to get the most out of this,
Hmm.
you know,
So,
for doing it.
very standard. I try to position myself on the same side of the table as the seller. The way I like to go about that is I always let them know. I'm like, hey, I don't make the final decision here. There's a finance team that has to approve us. So typically, what I like to do is I like to get a number out of them first, and I tell them I'm like, look, if that's the number you want, that's fine. The worst thing that our finance team tells us is they simply say no. And a lot of times they're not, they're not realistic about the numbers. So you do have to tell them no, and you have to break down the figures to them. But that's what I like to do. I like to position myself on the same side as the sellers, and ultimately I want them to feel like I'm going to bat for them. You know what I mean?
Mm,
I'm trying to run the company now as if it would be ran the day of tomorrow. The day of tomorrow, like acquisitions people, they're gonna have to get numbers approved. So I'm already doing that beforehand, right? Making sure that we're setting up for scale.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Um, and so what? Okay, so tell me a little bit about how you analyze the property. Because obviously, usually when we're dealing with wholesale deals, right, there's an ARV, right, but you guys have an assets value. So how do you come up to that conclusion of like what is the assets value of the property to kind of, accurately, adjust what you're gonna be making on it or
That's a
offering
good
the
question
seller?
because that's a good question because a lot of times, the people that were the customers that we're in contact with, they have no idea about the house. So we don't talk about conditions or this or that. We just always assume the worst. But we know, like for example, if a house's ARV is 500, we know it because we wholesale, right? If a
Hmm.
house's ARV is 500, we know that give or take the as is price, a buyer is willing to buy it at 350. That's a fair statement, right? There's margin in there for them to fix up the house and for them to sell it at
Hmm.
500. So if there's two owners in that case and that 350 grand gets divided in two, we know that 50% of that property is worth 175 grand. So
Hmm.
now we just need to come to an agreement with the seller on a fair price that makes sense for them and that we're able to deliver the service and obviously make a living.
Right, that makes sense. And okay, so a little bit more on that. So you say 500, yes, but 350 is kind of rough estimate of what the assets value is. Is there a formula that you
Yeah.
use? Like, do you take the square footage and times it by a certain kind of dollar amount to kind of get the repair, or is there or you just kind of like how do you do that? How do you ballpark it?
There, no, there's not a formula specifically that we use. We take a look at ARV. We assume that the property meets everything, and so we look at it as if we were fixing flippers. What would we need to buy this property at,
Mm,
right? And whatever that number is, then at that point we now deduce the amount that we need to make or whatnot. But no, there's not an exact formula that we use for
okay, gotcha. Okay, cool. All right, so tell us a little bit about you know we're nearing the podcast end here. Maybe you have a couple 5 or 10 minutes more. But tell us a little bit about your journey. Like what have you seen as the biggest lessons that you've come across? As your journey has progressed, and now you're sitting at where you are today with the success you have.
I mean, one of the biggest lessons I always go back to it because I just continue to get more nuance on it is focus. Like first business that I had, the windows and doors company, I didn't understand business focus, right? So like I just had
Hmm.
multiple businesses, learned that lesson. Then
Yeah.
when I had the conversation with Alex, I didn't understand marketing focus. Like I learned that lesson. I had five different marketing channels and Alex, one of the biggest things that he told me was like when he grew Gym Launch, they literally did not get a second marketing channel until they were doing more than 1 million a month. We're not even close to that. So I'm like, okay, it makes sense. Like you want to be all focused in one business, one marketing channel, serving one avatar. And I
Yeah.
think I think that's probably the biggest. It's just I see too. Like if you take a look at standard wholesale companies in our business, what do? They wholesale, they fix and flip, they burr, they do novations, they do everything. And then if you take a look at their marketing, they do direct mail, they do PPC, they do cold call, they do SMS, and then you wonder why they're not able to grow. Well, it's because they're spread thin across multiple different exit strategies and marketing channels. So that's probably the biggest. Um,
Yeah.
if there's, I'm trying to think of another good one for you. That's for sure the biggest though, honestly. Like I feel like that's why only less than 0.5% of entrepreneurs ever get to $10 million, which is
Yeah.
not even a huge amount, but that's 0.5% of entrepreneurs get to $10 million plus. And I think it's just lack of focus, in my opinion.
That's crazy. Okay, awesome. And tell us a little bit about how you structure your day. Obviously, you have a life outside, right? But how do you optimize your life, or your day, so you can have the most output, at your work or just overall happiness if that's something you measure for or you know whatever.
No, don't measure for that because I am happy doing what I do. But
Uh,
so the way I structure my day is I wake up at 5:30. I'm already working by 6. So between 6 to 9, which is 6 to 9 is really working on the business, and then nine to 7 is working inside the business. Within that time, I have literally an index card in front of my desk which is where those 3 hours, which is where I invest my 3 hours in. So it's either I'm doing private investigation during that time because I'm still the person in the company that wears that hat, right? I'm doing private investigation, gathering leads. That's one bucket. On another bucket, if we're hiring for a role, I'm doing posts and I'm doing outreaches during that time. So like if we're hiring for another, call it a follow-up specialist, I'm trying to make 150 outreaches, reach out to people to see if they're interested in applying. So that's the second bucket, and then the last two buckets. Sales is a third bucket. I can't start that at 6 in the morning, but I could start that at around 8 a.m., which a lot of companies don't. I think if you can start sales at 8 a.m., you get a huge head start on the competition. Um,
mhm.
and then I'm trying to think what's the fourth thing that I have in front of my bucket. Oh, delivery. So we right now have a good amount of deals in the pipeline. I think mid 30 deals in the pipeline. So during that time, I'm sending emails to attorneys. I'm making sure that there's no bottlenecks in any kind of deals, and if there are, like during that time, I'm figuring it out and pushing the deal forward.
Okay,
That's how I
gotcha.
structure my day. So from nine to answer the rest of your question, from 9 to 7, which is when I'm working inside the business, the mornings I'm now doing huddles with our sales team. So it's just me and one more person, follow specialist. And then I literally go on a sales couple hours after that. And then in the afternoon, depending on the day, I might have like a coaching call. Like I just recently hired a coach. So I'll get on a call with him, and then the majority of the day, I'm really just selling.
Gotcha. So sales takes part of most of your time, but you also do, you work on the business, sales and do sales huddles. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And when you talk about coaching, how important has that been, as a contributor to your success,
Yeah. I appreciate you asking that question because I actually just came to the realization the other day. I actually never want to go again without having coaching 24/7. So I'll tell you how I got to that conclusion. The biggest companies in the world, they're public companies and they have board of advisors, right? What's a board of advisors? They advise the C-suite or whatever the case may be. They advise them on which blind spots they have or which direction the company should go, right? So if the biggest companies in the world have that, why do small businesses or small companies not look at it from that same angle? So you take a look at it from that angle. You also have sports team. Do you ever see a coach not coaching in a sports team like the Miami Heat? No, you always have a coach 24/7, right?
yeah.
So do fighters, so do boxers. So I've just came to that realization that I want to have constant coaching. I think there's different coaches for different seasons. So when I first got into the space, I was with Will for 14 months, and that was great. Then I had Tiff and Josh. You probably have heard of them, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
then nowadays, I'm getting coached by Neil, somebody who grew one of the biggest wholesale operations down in South Florida to almost $30 million a year. So there's different coaches for different phases, but I just think I've came to that hard realization like I want to be coached 24/7 because I have blind spots and I constantly need work. So that to me is what a coach can help you out with.
Poof. Okay. All right. Well, that's great. Last question. What is this guy Neil teaching you at $30 million of revenue? That sounds like some kind of high level education. Is it like
Yeah.
what does the education get to? Like what kind of level is it? Is it like what does it look like, or what does it feel like when you're getting like high level education? Like what can someone expect, or experience?
So in this case, we've already done all the work of gaining the foundational knowledge the first couple of years in the business. But Neil understands where I want to go, right? And he
Mm,
understands that for us to get there, we need to set a really strong foundation. So that means core values, hiring people that meet your company's demands, right? A lot of people they believe in work-life balance. That's not something that I believe in. So I wouldn't want to hire somebody who believes in work-life balance, right? But making
right.
sure that our all the way from our mission to our our brand, our values. We want to make sure everything's aligned, and then at that point, I'm getting to the point now where it's me and another five team members, so it's a total of six of us. I need to be able to start managing because I can no longer just work through me. I need to work through other people. So making sure that I'm having huddles, right? Making sure that I'm investing my time into my teammates because ultimately, like they're the biggest assets to our company. Without them, we really can't do anything.
Hmm. That makes sense. Okay, well that's incredible. Okay, so what would you like someone to take away from this this conversation? This podcast.
Biggest thing I want somebody to take away from this podcast is, I mean, if they can save themselves from going through the pain that I had to go through, I would simply just say that every single business is scalable. I hate hearing when somebody says wholesaling isn't scalable or this or that isn't scalable. That's literally all in their mind. Like that doesn't exist. I can point out different companies that have definitely done it. So I would say just focus. Every industry works. Every industry has shit. So like people start having troubles in one industry and then they want to jump ships and get into another one. I would just say focus, man. Especially the smaller you are, stick to one thing, stick to one marketing channel and one avatar.
Okay, amazing. All right, and Oscar, tell us about your personal brand. Where can we find you? What kind of content are you putting out there? What kind of plans do you have?
Mhm.
For that.
Yeah, so best way to find me is on Instagram, Oscar Quintana underscore underscore. As
Hmm.
far as my content goes, right now I'm really just documenting the journey. So whether it's us losing money on a deal, failures, lessons, I just try to put it all out there. I wish I would have done it from my very first business, but ideally, we want to grow that out little by little. Right now, my time is heavily focused into the business, so I don't have a lot of time that I invest into the brand. But I just want to be open and I want to share with other entrepreneurs because to be honest, you go through so much pain as an entrepreneur, and if you can avoid somebody else from having to go through that and they could just pick up from where you left off, I mean, to me, I think that's a win.
Amazing. Alrighty. Well, Oscar, I think this has been a great episode. I hadn't had someone on that's doing asset recovery. I think this is a very new niche thing that you're doing, and I see the potential of what you got going on, especially with the mentors that you have behind you. So, we
I
look forward
appreciate you,
to
man.
hearing your success in the future, coming back on. Hopefully when you hit that $5 million milestone. I think it was 166 offers, right? So
166 offers, that's a goal.
that's right. So yeah, and it's been a pleasure. So for the people that are listening and stay to the end of this podcast episode, reach out to Oscar if you found value. If you're curious, just tell him how this impacted him. He shared some golden nuggets that not everyone gets to share. Or you have to go through it. So anyway, so all right, this is it, folks. All right, so we'll catch you later. Okay.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you for having me.